Good evening. Welcome to PoliticIt. I'm Senator John Johnson. Today we have Jamie Renda with us, and Jamie is the founder of Path Forward Utah. Nice to have you, Jamie.
Well, thank you, John.
Thank you. I appreciate the things that you're doing, and why don't you just explain briefly what Path Forward Utah is? What does that really mean?
Well, I think it's on focusing on the direction that we go to move forward versus focusing on the past. And what do we need to move our state forward? What do we need to move relationships forward and to better people in our state?
And you've worked a lot on race relations, and that kind of goes back to your initial work in South Carolina. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. My husband was military, and in 1997 we moved to South Carolina. And at that time, there was a Republican governor named David Beasley who was in his first term, but he attempted to take down the Confederate Battle Flag during that first term. And he ended up losing the election because of that. And so after the election, I went to the NAACP and I said, I'd like to help with this cause. I said, I'm conservative, I'm Republican, but this is something that I don't feel like a non-sovereign flag should be flying in a sovereign location. At that time, the United States flag, South Carolina flag, and the Confederate Battle Flag were flying on top. So after I went down 4 times, they never got back to me. And finally, when I met with the director, Dwight James, he said that they're no longer working on that. And I thought, how can you not be working on that? The entire election was based on the Confederate Battle Flag. And so I started an organization called Two Flags in 2000. We brought together Republicans, Democrats.
2 flags in 2000.
Yeah.
So you just wanted the American flag and the South Carolina flag.
Exactly. The sovereign flags that should be flying. And it was not just flying on the dome, it was also in the House and Senate chambers. So first I spent a couple of months in the library, and at that time I had 2 little girls, and I just had my 3rd child. And so when the girls were at school, I'd take my baby to the library and we'd do research. And I discovered that the flags didn't start flying. A lot of people thought they'd been up there. Mississippi, well, didn't you spend time in Mississippi?
Yeah, I was a professor at Ole Miss.
So Mississippi was the only state that had some historical legitimacy on flying the Confederate Battle Flag because it actually started flying after the Civil War. South Carolina, it went up in the House chambers in 1939, and that was about during the time the Dixiecrat Party was forming and under Senator Strom Thurmond. And then it went up in the Senate chambers in 1956 in direct response to Brown versus Board of Education. Georgia also changed their flag during that time to integrate the Confederate Battle Flag. And then it went up on the dome in 1961 in celebration of the 100th year of the Civil War. So it's kind of crazy on that. And it was supposed to just fly short time. They pulled it down and then they'd put it back up. And that was under Governor Fritz Hollings, which after he was governor, he became a U.S. Senator, a Democrat U.S. Senator. And so I looked at it, and even the sons and daughters of the Confederacy at the time were asking for the flag not to be used in a political way because they saw that would bring harm to the Confederate soldiers. And so separate that out a little bit because a lot of people look at the Civil War and they want to make it really simple. It was about slavery, and it absolutely was about slavery. But the average foot soldier who was fighting in the Civil War was not fighting for slavery. And that became really apparent to me as I started petitioning senators like yourself in South Carolina and House members, and they would tell me, my ancestors didn't own any slaves. They weren't fighting for slavery. And so sometimes, and we see that in our world today, is that we're told a war is about one thing when it's really about something else. And so the foot soldiers are fighting for one thing, and those in power are fighting for something different. And that became really apparent to me during this lobbying effort of talking to people and helping them understand.
So was that your first experience with lobbying members of the Senate and House?
It was. Yeah.
Interesting, because actually you're really good at it.
So what I did too is I put together all the Democrats and all the Republicans on who supported the flag flying and who didn't. And the Democrat Party at that time was made up of over 50% blacks. And if you looked at the Caucasian members of the Democratic Party, they had the same percentage of people who supported the flag flying as the Republicans.
Interesting.
So in reality, there was more Republicans who wanted the flag to come down, percentage-wise. And so it was definitely divided upon race, because obviously all the blacks wanted the flag to come down, and rightfully so. But a significant number of the Republicans, and so a lot of people wanted to make this on the Confederate battle flag, that's a Republican thing. Bill Clinton and Al Gore actually used the Confederate battle flag as part of their campaign memorabilia back in 1992. And Hillary Clinton even did in 2008.
Interesting.
So
how did that go on then? How did you really get people to come around on that issue? And I know there were many people involved, right? But you certainly were.
Well, I was told it couldn't be done.
You know, one thing I've learned, you don't tell Jamie Renda that it can't be done.
Yeah. I get a vision in my mind, but I think approaching it in a positive way. I wasn't trying to tear down the Confederate battle flag, though the reasoning for it flying was not a wholesome reason. Again, I said, like in Mississippi, do you know what the original battle flag was?
No.
It was an all-white background with the current, what we know as the current battle flag in the corner. And the design for that was the superiority of the Caucasian race over that of the barbaric race.
Wow.
And the problem with that flag, and so, I mean, it had a racist beginning.
Right.
The problem with that flag is it looked like a surrender flag. And so they did not use that long. But again, this is back, in 1861. You didn't have social media. You didn't have newspapers. A lot of these things were not known to the average person. And those in power who were pushing for the Civil War, who had a financial vested interest, were fighting for a totally different reason than the foot soldier was. And so the sons and daughters of the Confederacy, again, when the flag started being used for reasons that they knew would bring dishonor to those who fought in the Confederacy. And I know this language probably sounds to a lot of people wrong, but there is a difference, and you have to separate that out, because if we try to have a conversation without understanding the dynamics of that, then it's too simplified of a conversation, and we won't understand the real history of what took place in the South. Many of those Southerners came from very poor circumstances from European countries, and they truly were here because they came from oppressive central governments, and they did not want an oppressive central government. And so when they say they're fighting for states' rights, there's a lot of validity to it. Two things can be true at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. We're going to take a break and we'll come back.
Tired of media bias? Frustrated by political noise? PoliticIt.com cuts through the clutter, giving you real facts, clear analysis, and unbiased insight on the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay empowered. Whether it's elections, policy changes, or breaking news, we've got you covered. No spin, no agendas, just truth you can trust. Visit PoliticIt.com today, because informed citizens shape the future. PoliticIt.com, where politics meets clarity.
Welcome back to PoliticIt. We've got Jamie Renda with us. Jamie's the founder of Path Forward Utah. Before the break, we were talking about this effort you had in the South Carolina on the Confederate battle flag flying in the state capitol. So let's just kind of wrap up that discussion. What ended up happening after all of your efforts?
Well, I'm going to touch one base on Strom Thurmond, because he's the one that kind of made the Confederate battle flag popular back during the 1940s through the 60s. And he was actually one of the longest serving senators for some time, and he changed, and this goes to the Republican Party. He's one of those that changed from a Democrat to Republican. And because of that change and a few others, they talk about the great change where, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, where the Dixiecrats became the Republicans.
Yeah. And so I tried to work with Strom Thurmond's family, because at that time he was being celebrated in South Carolina, a statue was being put up. A lot of people didn't know that he had a black daughter. And he was one of the biggest pushers for segregation in the South. And so I've tried to look at him through different lenses on that, because he was very faithful on being a father to his daughter. They maintained good relationships throughout the years. And so I looked back on that, and that was at a time, I think he fell in love with someone that he couldn't marry. And so I think his solution to that was segregation. Does that make sense?
Oh, interesting.
So I think we look at people and we judge them, and I'm not saying I agree with what he did, because he was very instrumental.
But sometimes you have to look at things through their eyes.
Yeah.
And what they were actually trying to accomplish.
And because from my understanding, he fell in love with this young woman that worked with his family, and she became pregnant, and it was taboo. He couldn't marry her. But the fact that he continued a relationship all the way up until the day he died with his daughter from this relationship tells me something about who he was. And I don't know, humanity. We've got to look at humanity in a different way, that we are. We can't judge somebody always based on the outside appearance of their actions.
Yeah.
And so anyway, we were successful. In June or July of 2000, the flag came down. It went up on, and
So was there a bill that was passed then that caused that to happen?
Yeah.
So it was actually passed into law.
It was passed in law. The House and Senate chambers had, and you're probably aware of this, they had just been remodeled, and and pictures were taken, and the Confederate battle flag was prominently shown in this, and that was during the year 2000, and so now the flags are coming out of the House and Senate chambers and off the dome. They ended up going on the Confederate monument outside on the Capitol. So it wasn't an official location, but I told them at that time, you're going to regret the day you did this, because this will come back and bite you. We had a monument drawn up, put it in brass, put it behind glass. Don't fly the flag on State House grounds. And in 2015, we know what happened. Nikki Haley was governor, and people started climbing the flagpole and bringing it down, and she's the one that put an official end to the Confederate flag flying at that time. So a lot of people don't understand the past back in 2000 when it flew on the dome and in the House and Senate chambers. They look at the Confederate monument, and that's actually what started the monuments coming down in 2017, when General Lee's monument in what was the infamous, Trump saying that there were good and bad people on both sides.
Right. Yeah.
And he was taken out of context on that. But so that the South Carolina flag coming down off the Confederate monuments kind of was the beginning point of the monument.
So fast forward to today. Now you moved to Utah, and what was your motivation when you came here with this Path Forward Utah?
Well, since that time in South Carolina, I looked at the dynamics of the Black American vote, and blacks are voting disproportionately 90% to 10%. And I thought that's not healthy. It's not healthy for Black Americans. It's not healthy for our political system. And so it's been my goal for 25 years to change the Black American vote. And so this is what I've been trying to educate blacks on, the power of their vote, because a lot of people say, well, we only make up 14%. But when you have that disproportionate vote of 90-10, a 10% swing is 2.8% of the population, because you're swinging 1.4% of the vote one direction that was another. So that's 2.8%.
Yeah, and these were votes that the Democrats really depended on, right? Yeah. That was part of the base, and that was a very solid base, and it didn't sway much from there, right?
Yeah. So Republicans are guilty on the fact that they never really went after the Black American vote. They let the media set the tone, and everything's divided on race. And so I thought it's just not healthy. And so it's not healthy for anything in our political system. So that's why I've made this my quest, or I don't know, God kind of put it on my heart that this needed to change. And even if you look at these videos, that you were on one of my Trump Tater videos.
Right.
And that was before George Floyd. And my main thing that I talk about is we have to change the Black American vote. If you look on with the one with Burgess Owens, I talked about that. And so I'd like to talk about something that happened. Do you know what happened 3 days before George Floyd was killed?
Yeah.
You can't. Okay, so this is never discussed, John, and it's so crucial. That's the day that Joe Biden went on what is known as the Breakfast Club. Do you know what the Breakfast Club is?
No.
It's the most listened to Black podcast in America. And they had tried to get Joe Biden on for over a year. So they finally have him on. In a podcast, now yours is a little bit shorter. Most podcasts are longer. So Joe's on this podcast, and Charlemagne the God questions Joe about the 1994 crime bill. And he pushes Joe on that. And he's supporting Joe, but he's still giving a little pushback because Joe Biden was very instrumental in this pretty horrific crime bill that penalized minorities, in poor people, not just minorities, but poor people in a disproportionate way, crack versus cocaine. And Joe, 10 minutes into this podcast, says, I've got to go. And he says, we've been trying to get you on for over a year, and you're going to cut Black media short? And he says, well, we've got to get you back on, 4 months to the election. And Joe Biden responded, do you know what I'm going to say now?
Yeah.
If you even have to think about voting for me, you ain't Black. Now, why this matters is because when George Floyd died on Monday, these were peaceful protests. On Tuesday, they were peaceful protests. First, it was Candace Owens, Larry Elder, conservative Blacks who were upset about that comment. But Sunday, sports people were talking about it. Hollywood people were talking about it. And Wednesday, it was still being discussed. So what did the Democrat Party have to do? They sent Antifa in to what was peaceful protest. Almost all Americans at that
To really
point,
stir people up.
to stir people up.
Break windows,
yeah.
turn over cop cars, start
Because
fires.
they can't afford to lose the Black American vote. And they saw that Joe Biden's comment was shaking people up, and people were having that hard conversation. So they took what were peaceful protests. Most of Americans were on board with what happened to George Floyd was wrong when we saw the video. Now, more things came out after, but originally we were on board and said this was wrong. But they turned peaceful protest into riots because they did not want to lose the
all
Black
across the country.
All across, yeah. But if you go in, you'll see people dressed in black, they weren't Blacks, with umbrellas and hammers, and they were busting out windows, spraying "Be Up, Black Lives Matter," and antagonizing people who were hurt and exploiting their feelings. And that's what caused the Summer of Love.
Interesting.
So anyway, that's been my quest. We have to do better at building relationships and not allowing the media to direct this narrative and keep us separated.
So let's talk about some of those things that you've done.
Okay.
In terms of that. I don't think people realize how deep you've gone into this, really. Talk about some of the events you've had and how you've really ignited a flame within the Black community. People who genuinely share a lot of the ideals with the Republican Party.
They do. Most Blacks are conservative, socially conservative, especially a lot of the push that we've had in recent years with the radical, and I say radical LGBT movement because I think most Republicans had reached a level that, it's like a live and let live attitude on freedom.
Right.
But then it just continued to get pushed and pushed and pushed to, biological boys playing in girls' sports, this transgender movement. Most Black Americans weren't for that. And abortion's another thing that Black Americans, by nature of being Democrat, were kind of forced to be part of. And so I think it just reached a point that they needed an alternative. And Trump was the first alternative.
Which is interesting when people think about that, right?
Yeah. I was not initially a Trump fan, but in my baked potato restaurant, after Trump won, and I created this Trump tater character.
Right.
And I put it all over my restaurant, so I'm a big
Right.
free speech advocate. But he did everything I wanted somebody to do. He actually asked for the Black American vote. He actually,
one of the first Republicans that's done that in a big way, right?
Oh, he did. That actually discussed prison reform in the 1991 or for a crime bill. Funded historically Black colleges, pushed for educational choice for communities that did not have a choice. The opportunity zones that Senator Tim Scott started, all the things that I have been saying we need to do these things. It was just the right thing to do, and President Trump did those things, and then he gets no credit for it from the media, and he actually did all the things that were on my checklist, and so I became a pretty diehard Trump supporter.
Interesting. And a lot of these groups that you formed with blacks across Utah, they were kind of drawn into that, weren't they?
They were. Well, initially, it's like, I'm not afraid to discuss how I believe.
Right.
And so, matter of fact, a lot of the Black Utahns that I work with weren't initially Trump supporters or conservative, but I don't hesitate to have the hard conversations and tell them the why. And I don't care if they don't follow that, but I start the hard conversations. And I think that's where it begins, is having those conversations, looking at the things we have in common. The Marshall White Center was one that I supported. And so I worked with people here in Ogden that was a priority. And I think we have to find the things that we have in common and build on that. And then we can solve some of the things that we don't have in common or we don't feel we have in common, and some of the resolve some of the misunderstandings that we have. And so we've had all kinds of groups connecting people. One of the things I believe is important, you have universities and schools that are teaching kids the way to solve problems is through protest. And protest is not solving the problems. Just like in South Carolina, that was not an easy feat, John. I sacrificed a lot for my family and my kids at that time. It was a year and a half of time that took away from my family to go down and petition every senator, every House member, to build coalitions. But that's how you change society and build on civilization. So that's what Path Forward Utah does, is it teaches people what the process is. It connects them with who their elected leaders are. And if you want to make a change, then this is the process and how you make change.
Yeah. I must say, I met a lot of my closest friends through some of the efforts that you've made, right? And building ties to people that I wouldn't have before, right? And I just appreciate those efforts. I know, when Nicole Hannah-Jones came in and you helped to counter that with Bob Woodson, who I met for the first time during that event. And I just, when I met him, there's a spark in his eyes, right? And there's a kindness in his soul that people really need to get to know. And I think that kind of exemplifies some of what you were trying to do with Path Forward Utah. I think he was a star that really aligned closely.
Yeah, he's coming here next week again. You ought to try to get him on your podcast.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? That would be really wonderful to do that. What's he coming in for?
He's going to go to General Conference.
Oh, he is.
Yeah. And so one of the things that you mentioned about that spark in his eye, it's hard to have that spark in your eye when you're angry and when you feel like a victim and you're focused in on what people did wrong to you. And that's one of the things that I saw so detrimental in DEI and critical race theory, is it tried to put off on one group of people something of the past that in all reality, percentage-wise, in likelihood, their ancestors may not have had anything to do with.
Right.
And then on the other hand,
it was divisive. It wasn't uniting.
Yeah.
And that's the cool thing I saw with Woodson. I mean, he was right in the middle of the civil rights movement, right? And I look at the stuff he did with the 1776 Unites project, and some of the things he's really pushing, and I think that so aligns with what you've been saying with Path Forward Utah. The other person I think that got involved because of that, I mean, your relationship with Rod Hall and the school board race. You can see that same spark in his eyes, right?
And I wish you could have gone to our Black History Month celebration.
Yeah. Well, talk little bit about that and why that really exemplified kind of what Path Forward Utah is about.
Yeah, so we've gotten a little pushback on that because I think with what we've gone through in these last few years with critical race theory, DEI, and all the contention, people go, well, why have a Black History Month celebration? But to me, I see Black history as just part of our DNA as Americans. It maybe was some of the initial, our original sin, if you will, of America, but it's also our redemption. I mean, we put in our Constitution that all men are created equal. And then we went on to fight a civil war to manifest that into reality. America is one of the few places that you can really, it doesn't matter what circumstance you're born in, you can end up in the top of your class, go to university that you weren't expected to go to. If you look at our vice president, J.D. Vance, and there's a lot of poor whites. There's a lot of poor people of hard circumstances of all races in our country, and there's not a limitation put on what you're able to do in America.
Yeah, I mean, JD's a perfect example of that, right? Yeah.
So, I just think America's about redemption. It's about second chances and opportunities. And I think Black history is very much part of who we are as a nation. And so that's something I think we should celebrate. And we celebrated the excellence, the resilience that is part of American history. It's part of Black history.
Well, that's why that's why that letter from Birmingham jail hits me. When you think of Martin Luther King and his appeal to goodness.
Yep.
And really the foundational principles. One of the things I like to say is that Thomas Jefferson penned the words, all men are created equal. But it was actually 77 years later that Lincoln made us a more perfect union, right? That doesn't mean we're perfect, but he put us on the pathway. And it was because of the very principles that were put into place with our founders, which, going back to Thomas Aquinas, right? It was those principles that made it a reality.
Yep.
And I was pleased that that Martin Luther King saw that in the things that he was doing, right? Right before he was killed, he actually gave that speech where he said, "I've been to the mountaintop." Right, and I've seen the promised land, right, and I may not live to see us entering, right, but he could see that they were at the precipice, right, that they were close, and I really appreciate what you've done with Path Forward because I think it really is a unifying thing, the fact that now. Mr. Woodson's coming back to go to General Conference. It's kind of that was a cool reunion when he came here and met with the First Presidency, right? And you brought him to the Capitol to meet with a lot of the legislators. But what a great event that was.
Well, back to Rod Hall. Okay. I know the time's almost over.
Let's.
But Rod Hall is going to be a unifying force on our state school board. But his mother at the Black History Month, you got to go back and watch the Black History Month celebration. Her story, Rod Hall's grandfather was killed by the KKK.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they suffered a whole lot, but they didn't hold on to what they went through. And I think that's one, again, that we're founded on a Christian nation and for how important forgiveness is. Not always for the person who wronged us, but for ourselves. And when we hold on to things, it holds us back. And so seeing the power of that forgiveness within the Hall family. I'm
going to go watch that.
Yeah, it was really powerful because they could have held on and been bitter, but they didn't. His grandmother ended up serving, was one of the first blacks to serve on the school board and served 31 years. So for Rod to be in this position here in the state of Utah,
It's
serving in our school,
historic from his family perspective, right?
it is.
But honestly, when I had Rod on my podcast, that was one of the first times that I did a podcast where I almost cried. Just listening to him and to feel the spirit he has, right? And that unifying voice that he represents, I think is fabulous.
And I think it's important that people have role models. And I think having role models that of people who look like you, I mean, obviously, we're in a state of LDS people. And if you go outside of Utah and you're in some place that doesn't have a lot of LDS people, you seek LDS people out. And I think it's, the same thing with race and other things that you do, you want people who have different things in common. And race in and of itself, this color of our skin doesn't mean how much we have in common, but there is some commonality to that. Oftentimes it's culture. But kids in our school system, they need some black students in Utah, need people like Rod Hall and Ron Williams and others to look up to and say, hey, look what they've accomplished. And I'm not held back just because I'm black or just because I'm Latino, or that we need role models across the state of Utah, all different races.
And bringing back a simple concept that was true in our founding, the idea of virtue and living a virtuous life. And that appeal to the past is a really important one. And we've come to a point where we really think that we can have a value-free education, and it's taken us in the wrong direction.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see where our education goes. And Path Forward Utah is hoping to have a hand in that. But, with the changes being made on a federal level, and I'm excited that we actually have a state school board right now that I think are ready to handle and embrace whatever changes are coming.
Well, and we have a real pioneer in that area in Burgess Owens.
We do. And his story is great, too. He spoke at our event.
Yeah.
And one last thing, because I know...
Yeah, well, I think people... I'm going to go back and watch that, and I think other people should watch it.
It was really good. But Path Forward Utah is... Our next step is getting involved in civics and pushing some civics curriculum from a unique perspective. And so I'm excited to be... I'm excited for our next step.
Right.
And I think we have to inspire our young people on the why. Why should they want to get involved in civics and understand civics? And civics is building a relationship together to form a community. And how do we do that? And so I think oftentimes we talk about the Constitution, but we've got to get down to the community level, is that each of us have a responsibility to make our city a little bit better, our state a little bit better, our nation a little bit better, and to solve some of the problems that we're facing. And we have to inspire our young people that America is worth saving and America is worth fighting for, and they should be part of it.
And that civic engagement is really what I believe Jefferson had in mind with the concept of the pursuit of happiness, because that is the pursuit, right? And yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jamie, for all you do, and thank you for Path Forward Utah.
You're welcome.
Go watch that celebration that you had. How do people find that?
It's on our Facebook, Path Forward Utah.
Okay.
And I have it pinned to the top right now.
Yeah, and it was actually at Rod's church, right?
It was.
Pastor Bickle and what a wonderful group of people that is.
Yeah, and if you're LDS, I'm LDS, but I always tell all my LDS friends, all LDS people need to go to a Baptist church at least once or twice a year.
Yeah, yeah.
We need to experience how other people praise God, and their church is fabulous. So if you want to take your family to
Layton Christian.
Faith Baptist Church in Layton.
Yeah, Faith. Yeah, that's right. Faith Baptist Church. Yeah, thank you. We'll see you guys next week.